Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lara and today I'm going to be doing a review of These Burning Stars by Bethany Jacobs. I have also read the second book in the series, which is going to come out later this year. I'll only touch on it briefly because I have now read the first two books in what is a trilogy. Without further ado, let's jump into what this book is about. These Burning Stars is essentially, very simply put, a cat and mouse revenge story. This is the sort of story that I don't typically read. I'm not necessarily a big fan of revenge stories because almost always the outcome is very predictable. But this is the sort of story where it's very much kind of on the ground level, a cat and mouse revenge story, but then there is this broader universe and there is a lot of politics and backstabbing and lots of things happening in the kind of background as well. So whilst this story, I would definitely frame it as a cat and mouse revenge story, there is a lot more going on in this world that starts to open up by the end of the first book and gets explored more in the second book. So with that in mind, I'm now going to jump into my review. There will be no spoilers. I have not heard anyone talk about this book and I think more people need to read it because it is fantastic. So with that in mind, let's jump in. So what did I love about this series? The first thing that I really love about this series is the writing. Bethany Jacobs is an incredibly talented author. She is so good at writing plot and characters, world building. She has created a very distinct world. This is very much a space opera, and I feel like a lot of space operas start to feel the same. They have the same kind of themes, they have the same kind of plot points, and while I haven't read a ton of space operas, this is the sort of space opera that I can get on board with because there's a lot of complexity in this world, but she doesn't shove it in your face and she explains things in a way that are very accessible to the reader. And there are always twists and turns to keep us on our toes. And they are truly twists and turns that you will not see coming. Like there was one in book one that I just did not see coming at all. And I'm not the sort of person that, you know, I'm trying to decipher what's going to happen by the end of the book, but I am generally one of those people that I can tell where it's going and I can tell what's going to be the big turning point by the end of the book. And this one, I had absolutely no clue. And it was very refreshing that I was actually quite surprised by this because, as I mentioned, cat and mouse revenge stories tend to be very kind of, they tend to follow the same formula, right? And they tend to have the same outcome. And in this one, that was just not the case. I loved it. Really loved it. She doesn't overuse words. She's very selective, let's say, in how she tells the story, and I think it really pays off. There is a decent amount of world building. We are in various different parts of this world, and I think each world feels quite distinct. Each world has a very specific feel to it, and I think by the end of the first book we have a sense of where each kind of character is in the world and how their environment is impacting them as individuals as well. So I really like that. I really do hope that by the end of the third book we do get a bit more exploration of this because we do definitely get more of this in book two, and I just think she's very talented at it, so I just want to see her do more of it because she's good at it. Like, it's really well done. It's not overdone. Like, I don't think, you know, she doesn't talk about necessarily like food or smells or clothes or anything like that, but she gives enough that you have a real sense of what each of these places are like and how, like I said, impacts each of the characters in their respective mindsets. One of the things that she does really well in this book that I don't really like, and I'm going to use an example of an author who I think did this particular mechanism really badly, is flashbacks. Now in Jade City, whatever the second one is called, her use of flashbacks in that book was awful and was a big part of the reason why I DNF'd that series, because I think writing flashbacks is a very hard skill and I don't think a lot of authors can do it very well. Bethany Jacobs is one of the best to have done it. There are two kind of main timelines that we're following both in books one and book two, and we're seeing particularly how each of the characters' decisions are impacting the events in the present day. And that is something that I really like when it's done well, but as I mentioned, I don't think many authors do it well. And yet she does it exceptionally well in this series. Every little decision has consequence, and you as the reader, if you're kind of thinking about this in the back of your mind, are wondering, how is this going to impact X, Y, or Z person further on in the series? It isn't spelled out to the reader as well. Like, I think if you are one of those people who likes to kind of tie little details together, you're gonna really appreciate this. If you are somebody who doesn't really care, you're also going to really appreciate it. I think she does it in a way that feels very accessible, and she does kind of indicate in the book what is a flashback and what is not. And I just think she did an excellent job of executing on it. Next, let's talk about characters. This is a multi-POV story. And this is very much, I would say, a female-centered story. The women in this book, I'm not going to talk about individual characters, but at least I won't name them because I don't want to accidentally spoil anything. But the women in these books are just so well realized. They are so well done. They are the female characters that I like. They are strong, but they have different levels of strength. You know, we have one of our characters, she's incredibly physically strong, and she's a very intellectually strong as well. Like, she's very much 10 steps ahead of everybody. She is moving chess pieces before anybody even realizes. Like, she's just so intelligent. We then have another female character who's very emotionally strong and very spiritually strong, and she is a bit more sensitive to what is happening around her, but it's not seen as a weakness. It's seen as something that gives her a level of strength that some of the other female characters don't have. And I love that. We then have another female character who is very street smart, and she's very strong in that way. You know, she's able to she kind of gets people, and she's able to kind of decipher things in ways that other characters are not able to. And so each of these characters represent different levels of strength, and they all kind of feed off each other. And by doing that, they enrich each of the other characters that they're interacting with. Like, it's just so well done. These characters are some of the best female characters that I've read just as a collective, because they all have very distinct goals. They all have very distinct character traits, and they all have very distinct directions that they're going in. And you don't really know where that's going to be, at least at this point in time. Like, it's super satisfying to read, very well executed. I'm really excited to see what Bethany Jacobs writes after this series, because she's exceptionally talented at writing female characters. There is also a really great kind of secondary cast of characters made up of male characters, non-binary characters. It's just really like well done. Each character kind of enriches and adds to the world in their own way, and it also, each character, I feel like, adds another extra layer to the world, if that makes sense. Like, we learn stuff about the society through these characters, and it's so good. So good. The last thing I will mention on characters is that I think something that Jacobs did exceptionally well in book one is the interactions between the characters. And I've said this before, and I will say it again, I love the quiet moments between characters. You know, when they're sitting around, they're just talking about what's been going on. Like, I love those moments. And we get quite a lot of that in book one. We get less of that in book two, which was one of my biggest issues with book two. But I loved how she did it in book one. And I just found that, again, it really enriched the world and the individuals in that world. Now, let's talk about themes. There are quite a lot of different themes explored, but I'm going to talk about the two main central ones that I think really play an important role in this series. And I think the main one is kind of the cost of empire, and what happens when governments and countries and empires, whatever you want to call it, are allowed to inflict their rule on people who are indigenous to a certain land. And it's really funny, it's not funny, but it's funny, for lack of a better word, that as I was reading this series, you know, we're hearing more and more things about what's happening in Palestine. And there are so many parallels between what is happening between the persecuted race, let's call it, in this world, who are called the Javenis, and what is happening to people in Palestine right now. So just to add a bit more colour to that, prior to the events of book one, there are references to a genocide that happened to the Javeni. And it's this really big, you know, horrifying event that happened to these people. They were massacred, they were displaced from their home, and they're just kind of not given any rights. Their culture has been eroded, their identity has been eroded, and nobody was sticking up for them. Nobody wanted to help them. Nobody kind of sided with them. They sided with the ruling power because they have that, right? They have power, they have wealth, and they have a monopoly on the resources that they gained by persecuting this particular group of people. So there is a lot of interesting commentary, whether that was intentional or not, I don't know, but there is a lot of very interesting commentary on to what extent will an empire go to get valuable resources that will further enforce their own wealth, and like how far are they willing to persecute the people to get that valuable resource, right? The parallels felt a little bit on the nose, to be completely honest. And again, I don't think that was intentional. I don't want to speak for the author. Maybe it was, but I really don't think it was intentional. And yet the way the Juveni are treated is just the perfect parallel. It's the perfect example of like what is happening to people today, right now, like literally right this second. So it was hard to read for that reason in places, but it was also weirdly refreshing to read, because it's like we are literally reading a sci-fi book about the genocide of a people, the erasure of their culture and their history and their identity. And it's done in a way that I think is quite sensitive. Like one of our main POVs in the second book is a Juveni, so he is from that people, and we kind of get his perspective on what's happened to him and his people. I think from a thematic perspective, that theme in particular, like it's very interesting, it's very relevant, it always will be very relevant because humans are horrible, evil people, and we've proven that over history, and I'm sure we will continue to prove that over history in the coming decades and centuries. I think if you're interested in that kind of idea of, you know, what is the cost of empire and how does that impact the people on the ground, then this is definitely a book or a series that you'd probably find quite interesting from that perspective. The other thing is that I did mention that this is a cat and mouse revenge tale, so obviously revenge is a big part of that. But the revenge aspects, I think, come from a deeper theme, and that is around, you know, identity and kind of figuring out who you are in a world that is trying to put you into a box, and figuring out who you are in a world that wants you to be a certain way. You know, this world is very much, you know, very dictatorial, very authoritarian. People don't really have that sense of individualism. And so we are seeing our characters, or particularly I would say one or two characters, really try to grapple with that, as they're also trying to grapple with the broader issues in this world as well. So I really like that kind of contrast of the individual struggles for their individual identity, but also coming to terms with the role that they have played and also their ancestors have played in perpetuating a genocide and massacring of a certain group of people. Fascinating stuff. Really, really well done. Done in, I think, in an incredibly sensitive way that humanizes these people, but also doesn't kind of excuse what they've done. It holds them to account, and we're seeing each of our characters come to terms with those things as well. I'm very, very curious to see how that kind of wraps up by the end of the trilogy. I don't really have any clue, to be honest, but I am really excited as to the direction of the series as it currently stands. So as it relates to book 2, I will just talk about it briefly. Book 2, you know, picks up pretty much straight after the events of book 1. And I would say, as I mentioned briefly earlier, my main critique of book 2 is that it is very action heavy compared to book 1. Like there's a decent amount of action in book 1, but like I said, I would say it's very intimate and very much a character study, but I think we get less of that in book 2. And I personally love that stuff. So it is very much a personal preference thing, but I would have just loved more character interactions because those are my favorite moments in general. We also do get a new POV, which I mentioned, which I was really happy about, and I really hope we get this POV again in the final book. I think overall it's like a solid continuation. I do think it suffers a little bit from middle book syndrome, but not as much as other series that I've read. But I think it's a solid middle book, and I'm excited to see what happens in book 3. I do believe this is only going to be a trilogy, so we have one final book to kind of wrap everything up. I have faith in Bethany Jacobs' ability to do that because I think she's an insanely talented author, and I think more people need to read this series because it is truly, truly fantastic. So good. So let me know down below if you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you have read this series, do let me know, because I have not met anybody apart from James, my Patreon, who is the one who put this series onto my radar. So thank you, James. And yeah, I'll see you down below in the comments. Thanks for watching, folks. Stay safe, take care, and I will see you very soon.